we are going to begin on our sky with a large square-headed brush, as we generally do. I'm going to begin by making it damp, wiping it off on my paper towel, then going to my palette, grabbing some primary blue, some titanium white here, mixing the two together, grabbing a little bit of black to darken it and desaturate it. Then once again, I'm mixing the two together. I'm trying to ensure that I don't have areas of blue, areas of black, areas of white, that they are together, that they are consistent, and then I'm mixing more of the color. Because it's great to kind of test what you want initially with a small batch, and then once you realize you have the color you want, you can make more of it, because of course the sky is fairly large and you'll probably need to do so. Now I'm going to apply it on the canvas itself. Of course, the brush is still fairly damp, so the pigment will run on the canvas fairly smoothly, fairly easily. As you can see, as it's drying, I'm moving my brush over it fairly quickly, trying to ensure that we don't get something streaky. And as we know from the 10-minute paintings, that is best achieved by moving your brush over an area very softly. You're not scraping the bristles into the canvas, you are just letting the paint from the tip of the brush touch the paint on the top of the canvas. So now we are going to grab our medium-sized round-headed brush, get it damp just like we do with all of our brushes before we begin. Then I'm grabbing some titanium white, mixing that in with the color we had before, and I want this to be brighter than the brighter portion of the sky, or rather the brightest portion of the sky. Then I'm going from the bottom of the canvas, moving in very small circular motions and moving the paint upwards. These are going to be our clouds, and I'm going to use them to direct the viewer's eye up into the sky, up around the moon, up near the stars, and we're going to use it as leading lines. Clouds don't always have to be moving horizontally, and we can actually use them diagonally as we are here. Then I'm taking that same brush, some pure titanium white, and I'm beginning to work on a little circle at the top here for our moon. Now, I recognize that drawing a circle can be a little bit difficult. Mine is not perfect. The audience generally won't be able to tell the difference. But if you're really concerned about it, you can trace a dime. If your canvas is larger, you can trace a dollar, and you can fill that in. But you can also just edit and correct it kind of in the way that I am there, picking up varying areas, moving them around, and ensuring that it's a little less of an oval shape. I'm also not applying a full white. I'm leaving portions of the sky showing through, and I want that because I want it to look three-dimensional. I don't want it to look flat, and our moon isn't finished. Just like our clouds, we're not finished. We're going back and we're adding more to it now. But we need to let that dry before we can go back in and add a glowing effect and all of that. Now, this is something that renders just a plethora of little stars. As you can see, they are different sizes, they are different shapes. And it's fantastic because it's a lot quicker than doing it by hand, and you're getting a lot smaller implications in it than you ever would with your hand itself. So you can also make it directional here by holding it very close to the canvas. I'm kind of doing it in a line. It is a diagonal line. It is similar to the lines that we created initially with our clouds. Now we are going to take an old square-headed brush. If you don't have one of these, you can just peel back the bristles as I'm doing here, apply pressure, and it'll kind of move the bristles out in varying directions. That way, when you make an application via a tapping stroke, you create just a litany of different impressions. It's great for trees and that sort of thing, implying foliage, and that's exactly what we're doing here. So I'm going to begin by making a fairly dark, rich green. I'm taking some primary blue, some primary yellow, some black, and as you can see, primary yellow, it's not a very strong color, so we needed to use a lot of it, and black and primary blue very easily overtake it. So it's not a 50-50 scenario ratio. You generally need to use a lot more primary yellow if you want to get something in the green sphere. So with that said, here I'm applying a set of trees in our background. I'm doing so in a tapping motion. And before most of my applications, I'm slightly turning my brush in the air. That way each tap, each application is a little bit different from the one next to it. I'm creating a lighter green, as you can see, and I'm applying this to the tops and only the tops of our tree line here, because of course the light is catching the tops of them, but as we move downwards, shadows from the top are being cast upon that area and the light is very much dissipating. So here we're just trying to get a nice mixture of a fairly dark blue for the back of our water mount. I'm beginning these applications with a horizontal stroke. As you can see, we are only moving in horizontal strokes because if this underlayer does show through to a point, we do want it to be moving in the correct way. Here I'm applying more of that lighter pigment, but of course our initial layer is still wet, so it will blend with that pigment and it will make it a little bit more subdued. And that's what's happening. This is good. It is building up transitions so that that middle area there is much brighter, and then we slowly get darker as we move to the left and the right. In the meantime, we're going to grab a very dark blue and begin to work on the bottom of our wave. Now, this water is moving up and it's kind of in a cylinder shape, like a wave is, right? So instead of doing our water in a horizontal movement, here we're doing it in a cylindrical movement. This is like the bottom right-hand corner of a cylinder or of a sphere. It's rounding, it's moving upwards. And that's what we really want to do with our wave here. Then we're going to go back, grab some primary blue, mix it in with a lot of our brighter pigment, and we're going to work on the next portion of the wave. This is right on top of that initial application. They are going to be blended together. You are moving the brush in a very similar way. We are building up this cylindrical portion of our wave. As you get higher in the wave, your applications, your pigments should be brighter because more light can pass through them. Here we're grabbing an even lighter color and we're doing more of the same. It's still that same movement. And the bottom of the wave can also be closer to a pure white. The bottom of the wave, because the water is crashing down and it's separating, the light can pass through it much more. And the top of the wave, because that's the first thing the light is actually hitting. So that's going to be much brighter as well. You might need to start the layer by making it a pure light blue like this, and then we'll add on the highlights after once the pigment has dried a bit so it doesn't blend too much, and so we can get those real highlights. But then we're going to have to do a flipping effect. So we have the cylinder is falling, it's crashing, and then there's a separate cylinder that's starting yet again, and that is the water rising up. And that's it, hitting the water, it's collapsing, and then it's exploding. So here you can see I'm grabbing straight titanium white. I'm beginning close to the top of our wave, and I'm just applying it over all of those areas that are breaking apart and catching a massive amount of light. The very thin portions of water, the portions of water that are spiking up, as you can see, we are now going to create little pieces that jet outwards. We're going to take a little bit of primary red here. The first time we're going to be using this, some primary yellow, the two will mix together to render an orange. It's worth noting that red is a much more dominant color, so you'll probably have to use more yellow than red. Then I'm taking some burnt umber and working that into our mixture as well, just giving it more of a earthy tone. So now it's a very warm earthy tone. Now I'm grabbing a tiny bit of titanium white to desaturate it and lighten it up just a little bit. And I'm going to begin applying our sand here at the bottom of our canvas. Pigments like white and black, specifically titanium white, will really help make a pigment much more solid, less transparent, less see-through. So we're adding a lot of white in there, but it still has that orange undertone, which is really nice because it does play well with all of our blue. Now here I'm taking more of a light blue, mixing it the same way we have in the past, and I'm beginning to add this highlight color. It's similar to what we have at the top of the wave, and I'm moving my brush in the same stroke that we did initially with the wave, and I'm blending the wave into the sand. The colors from the sand are blending into it, so you're getting a very natural transition. Going back to my palette, mixing with some titanium white, some of that primary blue, and we're going to add some highlights to the edges of the water that's rolling up onto the land. This is at the edges of them. These areas should be fairly sharp. We are in the foreground now, things don't need to be blurry, and we can really accentuate these areas. Now, I'm using a square-headed brush because it has sharp edges, and we want this tree to have fairly sharp edges as well. Here I'm mixing a darker pigment, a darker version of that pigment rather, and I'm beginning to work on the back of our trees. The side of the tree that is farthest away from the light source, which is our moon. So the light is illuminating the right side, while the left side is cast in shadow. Then I'm going to grab what is called a rake brush. Now you can buy these at stores like Michael's or other art supply stores, or you can make them by cutting out portions of your brush. I have a lesson on my channel called How to Cut a Brush. You can go and find that if you want to make your own. But essentially it is a brush that creates a litany of strokes with one swoop, one motion. We have the old square-headed brush where you can make a plethora of impressions via a tapping motion. This is the version that allows you to make multiple strokes with a single stroke. So it's a great technique when you want to save a little bit of time. This is something that can also be great for rendering fur, feathers, grass, all of the above. It's a really fantastic brush for saving time. I'm going to take some primary yellow. I'm going to apply that to my palette, really mix it out, grab a little bit of primary blue, bring that over here. Again, you want a lot more primary yellow than primary blue because primary blue is a much stronger pigment. Then I'm going to take some titanium white to thicken the pigment so it isn't fully transparent, and then add additional yellow to restore the saturation. Now I'm going to get a lot of that paint off of my brush because it can fill in all of the holes, and then I'm going to ensure that it's very wet, grab that paint, and begin applying it to the edges of our foliage here. We're going to the edge, we're dragging inwards, going to the edge, dragging inwards. Every time I drag inwards, I relieve pressure on my brush, so you get kind of a gradient from a pure thick pigment on the edge of the leaf, and then as you get towards the middle, it dissipates, and disappears. The middle of these leaves are generally fairly dense. The outskirts of them are much more transparent. They're much more see-through. More light can seep into them and through them. So the edges of these palm tree leaves are going to be very bright. They're going to be very vibrant. Where the middle portions are going to be darker because not as much light can sink in through them and reflect out. To create a glow, now that we have the harsh edges, I'm just applying this very watery wash around it. I'm taking my pinky finger and I'm blending it outwards. This is just going to make it look a little bit more illuminated. If you lose the sharp edge of the moon, you can apply that sharp edge yet again. So now we're really at that portion of the painting where we are solidifying things. We are adding all of our details and ensuring that the highlights are as light as we like. Hey there, it's Ryan O'Rourke. I truly hope you enjoyed today's little extra video. It was essentially a cut-up version of one of the many hour-long lessons which we offer over on patreon.com. Over there you'll also find digital sketches of the 10-minute painting lessons, digital sketches of these hour-long painting lessons, and a bunch of reference photos as well. So if any of that interests you, or if you just want to support the channel, go over there and check it out. It is a pleasure to make these long form videos, and I love to share them with all of you. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next Saturday with a new video, and above all, as always, stay creative.